just the Celtic regions. It's also found as a feast of the dead in other parts of the world. At least there's similar festivals like Dia de los Muertos in Mexico. The Day of the Dead has very similar ideas attached to it about the dead coming back to where they lived. And it's, I think, quite scary for people nowadays to talk the idea that the dead are coming back into the houses where they lived before. I think people would be afraid of that. But from the customs, the traditions that we have, it seems like this, at least in older time periods, was a positive thing, a welcoming thing, because people would leave their doors unlatched and to allow free exit or free entry for the souls of the dead. And some people would even leave, they'd set a place and put out a meal for the dead relative who was coming back on that night. And this is called a dumb supper, and that might be associated with the idea that the dead don't speak, that they no longer have the power to talk or to interact with the living, but at the same time they can be acknowledged or remembered as, you know, once having lived there, or whatever the case may be. So there are various customs, as I said, that are shared between the Celtic regions, and also, just to mention something that is also found in Mexico to do with the dead. In Mexico, on the Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos, you're not supposed to use anything sharp, or to throw water, for example, in the belief that, you know, you might accidentally hit a dead person with it. And in Ireland, traditionally, you're not supposed to use sharp pins or anything, or to sew on Samhain, in the belief that there might be spiritual beings or fairies around that you would accidentally prick. And when people would clean their kitchens, they would have the bucket of water, and in cities and in the country, and they throw the water out when they were finished. And on Samhain, before throwing the water, you're supposed to shout shocken or warning, so that anybody passing by wouldn't be soaked. So again, the idea that you can't see them, so they're invisible, but you should be careful not to hurt or offend them. So all of that suggests that it's a welcoming thing, and that people were trying to honour the dead, or you know, were aware that they're around rather than being afraid. But it becomes more, just to mention as well, that fairies are supposed to either not have any blood in their bodies, or to have some other kind of substance in place of blood. And that's another reason why they don't like being pricked with anything sharp, because it reminds them that they're not human. So there's many different layers of belief in the folk religion, folk beliefs, and one of those layers is Christianity. So just to explain to you that the Christian folk explanation of what fairies are is fallen angels. That when Lucifer was expelled from heaven, the angels who sided with him were cast out of heaven as well. But because they weren't evil, they couldn't be sent to hell. So instead, the ones who fell on earth became fairies, and the ones who fell in the sea became mermaids. And that they're trapped in this liminal kind of space, and they're not allowed back into heaven because they sided with Lucifer. And that this might be the idea where, you know, fairies have wings comes in, because it's not just the Tinkerbell image. So this is mentioned in different parts of the world, but the descriptions of the she in the mythology, the wings aren't mentioned. So there might be a conflation or a mixing together of Christianity and the old pagan beliefs about fairies in that regard. So the custom, it gets more complicated with individual customs then, as to whether it's something welcoming or it's something to keep away the dead, or to keep away other kinds of spirits. And one of those customs is guising, or dressing up. So when you go further back in time, people would dress as ghosts. So nowadays you have people dressing as all kinds of things, vampires and zombies and Disney characters or celebrities or whatever you want. But further back in time, the references are usually to ghosts or witches sometimes. So you do have the connection with the witch figure, which I'll come back to as well. And some have suggested that dressing up was again a way of honouring the dead, so showing that they're around. And white has, in many different cultures, is associated with death, because a corpse is pallid, it's bloodless. So you also have a suggestion that dressing up was for the opposite reason, so the dead wouldn't, or the fairies wouldn't take you away with them. And there's what's called, in Irish folklore anyway, there's what's called the wandering dead, or the unhappy dead, that they're people who have some kind of grievance against the living, or dead people who are coming back at Samhain, who have some kind of score to settle with one of the living, especially recently deceased. So it's been suggested that dressing up is to disguise yourself as the dead, so that the real dead can't access you or find you. And other customs as well. It's not clear whether it's to scare away spirits or to welcome them. So another example of that is the jack-o'-lanterns, which are carved out, hollowed out vegetable with a light put in it. So most commonly now that's associated with pumpkins, but pumpkins are not native to Ireland. It's when the Irish emigrated to America, you had the wave of